Okay, greetings. Today I want to talk about the something that's fun for me, and I think some of you might also enjoy it too. It's the idea of quotations at the beginning or end or middle of a book chapter, or sometimes even a technical paper. For this, I guess the first thing to say is a lot of people have written a lot of neat things, and not all of us have seen them all. And so when we see something that we particularly like, it's nice to be able to pass that around to a greater authorship by highlighting it somewhere or other and letting other people know that it exists. So that's one of the funs about having quotations. Now the last few years I was working on the tech and metaphon systems, and I'm going to use most of my examples coming from that. It also interacts with writing in some ways. That's why it's not so inappropriate to this course. Now there's a journal that's been published. It's in volume 8 now this year, called the Tugboat, the Tech User Group newsletter. And one of the things in their format is that they have a quotation at the beginning of every issue. And here's one, for example, about writing. Sinclair Lewis felt that his writing had suffered in the 30s because during his marriage he had let her talk him into using professional typists to make the final drafts of his scripts. He now regretted following her advice. He was convinced that if an author didn't do his own retyping, revising and improving as he went, he lost some control over his work. And Faulkner and O'Hara also did this too. This is a quotation that was used then in Tugboat. And here's a quotation from Fowler. No attempt will be made here to describe modern English usage in the matter of hyphens. Its infinite variety defies description. There is one principle, however, that seems to command at least lip service, and that is the hyphen is not an ornament, but an aid to being understood, and should be employed sort of when it helps the understanding. Okay, so this is Fowler. Another quote here is saying that we need artists to be programmers. And here was one that was for the recent issue here. We appreciate all of you who point out our errors. Here's how to keep score. If you find 6 errors or more, you're a professional. 3 to 5 makes you a trainee. Less than 3 makes you a desktop publisher. This is the trend of things nowadays. Okay. Now, so they begin with quotations, and one question is, how do you find these quotations? Well, one thing is you just if you live a reasonably varied life, words are around you all the time, and every once in a while you happen to stumble into something that's particularly apropos. In fact, you stumble into something that's particularly apropos out of context often now, where you can see something in a different way. One of my favorites is that I was actually in volume 4. I have a lot of things coming up that I'm planning to use as quotations in volume 4 of the Art of Computer Programming, and this is one of the things that keeps me going and saying I do want to write that volume, because I have such nice quotations that I can't, the text is going to have to be written too, but I'm really going to be glad to, when I talk about backtracking and I can refer to the Beatles song that there's nobody in my tree, and one of the things at the beginning is about techniques of bit fiddling, and I noticed that in Webster's dictionary the definition of a bit is that it's a boring tool, and or a boring tool anyway, and I thought that would work rather well for computer scientists. So I was going to use this as a joke and as an introduction to a lecture I gave about bit fiddling in Germany. But as I was driving to the university to give this lecture, I noticed there was a bumper sticker on the car in front of me, or was it on a sign on the truck in front of me? It said "Bitte ein Bit," and it turns out that there's beer brewed in Bitburg. Bitburg is the place that one of those places Ronald Reagan would like to forget about, and they also have Bitburg there, and so their slogan is "Bitte ein Bit." So I could use that kind of quotation in there. Well, so if you just keep your eyes open, you'll see things that are worth that are worth repeating. Another thing is, though, suppose that you want to actually find the quotation. You've got a format, and the format calls for having a quotation at the beginning of every chapter. Hello? No commercials on television, is this right? I'm sorry, I didn't know. You can't buy that beer here. No? Okay. Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't hear any of that. Now, so, then you have the other question, that is, if you have a format that sort of requires you to have these, and so you'd like to do sort of the best job and say, what's the best possible quotation I could use on topic X, and solve for X. And that's the thing I want to address the rest of this hour. That various techniques that I have used in order to do this. In other words, in the tech book, for example, let's see, where's the table of contents? It has 27 chapters and 10 appendices. 37 places where I need quotations, and the format called for 2 quotations at the end of each, and so that was 37 times 2, 74. So to find 74 quotations. Then came the Metafont book, which was the same format. So and it turned out that by great coincidence, it also, there's a preface as well. I'm sorry, so that's 76 quotations. So there were, again, 27 chapters and 10 appendices, and a preface. So anyway, the idea is to try to find quotations that reflect. Okay, now chapter 1 is the name of the game. Okay, and here's the quotation. So I was trying to figure out something about names, and this chapter is about the name tech itself. And since it's about the name tech itself, I actually was able to get a quotation about technique, which is also connects it somehow with art. And the point of the chapter is that the word tech comes from a Greek root that means art, and as well as technique. The same Greek word technique has led to both things. This turned out to be a Stanford author, by the way, who was a poet about this time and appeared in some. He was some Stanford guy that I never had heard of before. How did I find this particular quote? Well, I don't know. I might have looked up technique in Bartlett's familiar quotations. So let's take a look. There are many books like this, but Bartlett's is probably the one that's best known. And so in this book, it has lots and lots of things that are sort of the most, according to Bartlett's idea, was the most memorable things that these people wrote, and goes on and on by Byron, Keats, Macaulay, Browning, Fitzgerald, Tennyson, Melville, Dickinson, Twain, Miller, Hopkins, Field, so on, so on, so on. And then at the end, you can look up individual words. And so if I look up technique, I might find. Let's see. Where is it? Technique. Okay, well, there's only one reference to technique. It says technique, the very word, 937. And so I probably looked it up and said it wasn't, didn't connect it to art or anything like that I wanted to. No, well, here it is. Yes, this is it. Leonard Bacon. This is where I got it. What do you know? Technique, the very word, is like a shriek of art. Okay, so that's where I got that one. And it was something called PhDs, and so it said 1920 at Stanford. I wrote it in here. This is where I found it in the library, 811.4. And then okay, and so I give away that first secret, namely, Bartlett's quotation. Now that's an easy one. There's many other books of quotations in the reference room, and there are books of quotations that are translated from other languages. There are things called the quotable woman. There are quotations from black literature. There are quotations from folk sayings and different cultures, and there are quotations from different kinds of groups, and there's complete concordances to Shakespeare and Chaucer, so that every word that those people ever wrote you can find somewhere in these books. I guess I have to say that one of the things that for me is the most fun to do, if I have to say what do I enjoy most in life. I mean, I enjoy various things like playing music and things, but one of the highest for me is to go into a library and have some problem to solve, any problem whatsoever, but to try to sort of play the library as if it was an organ, as an instrument, to use the resources of a great library to solve some problem or other. And one of the neat problems is to take a particular theme and see if I can find a good quotation somewhere in the library, and how to do that. Now, this might not turn you all on, but for me, this is really living. And in the reference, so it came like I had, so I love to go to Stanford Library for an afternoon, and with an idea of, here I'm supposed to find 76 quotations. How many can I find today? I'll be happy if I can find 20 good ones. But I've done this in the British Museum Library in Harvard. When I was doing the Metafont book, I had the Widener Library at Harvard and the Boston Public Library, and there's many other great libraries, and do things at Berkeley and New York and Philadelphia and so on. Now the Princeton, so on. Now. Each of these reference rooms has a different collection of these books of quotations, and they're usually reasonably well indexed, and so you can look in the back and you can get some idea, and so that's a beginning of how to do it, and some of the things are very easy to find quotations. So then you've got to do the next level and get a really good quotation. Now, here's, for example, is a chapter called Fine Points of Mathematics Typing, and I had 4 chapters in a row about mathematics, and so I needed something interesting to say about mathematics, and so I liked this one, which I had just heard about it somewhere. Mathematicians are like Frenchmen. Whatever you say to them, they translate it into their own language, and at once it is something entirely different. And now here's a very good one apropos to our course. It says, the best notation is no notation. This is, you remember your homework assignment. Whenever it is possible to avoid the use of a complicated alphabetic apparatus, avoid it. A good attitude to the preparation of written mathematical exposition is pretend that it is spoken. Pretend that you are explaining to a friend on a long walk in the woods with no paper available. Fall back on symbolism only when it's really necessary. This is from that Halmush, I mentioned him before.
How do you do those line breaks?
Now, the line breaks are done by myself, by hand, on this right. When something is flush right, the only way to any kind of automatic breaking looks bad if it's flush right, if ragged left like this, and so I would play with these until I got them to the point where I liked them, and each one was individually played with. But speaking of line breaks, here's a chapter on line breaks. This is how text breaks paragraphs into lines. Okay, so when the author objects to a hyphenation, he should be asked to add or cancel or substitute a word or words that will prevent it. Authors who insist on even spacing always, sightly divisions always, do not clearly understand the rigidity of types. And this is, I had come across this when I was reading the history of what printers do when they do line breaking. Here was the one by Shaw. said that whenever William Morris found a line that justified awkwardly, he altered the wording to make it solely for the sake of making it look well in print. And I must say I do that. When a proof has been sent me with 2 or 3 lines so widely spaced to make a gray band, I've often rewritten it so as to fill up the lines better. I'm sorry to say that my object has generally been so little understood, the compiler has spoilt all the rest of the paragraph instead of mending the former bad word. So that's you also have to have control over the type, over the spacing yourself. If you're the author and you rewrite it so that it's going to look better, but then somebody else doesn't understand your intention, that screws up the other way. Speaking of that, though, the format of this book, the book designer designed it with a very long paragraph indentation, abnormally large indentation here, and this is also, it seems to be a style of the 80s. I think the Harvard Business Review, I noticed a magazine has this. I ran across this once a year or 2 ago. And something that you notice immediately when you start using that format is that it's not that unusual for a paragraph to end with just 1 word or 2 words, which is less than the length of the indentation of the paragraph indent. And so I had to rewrite a lot of paragraphs to add a couple of words at the end in order to make it not look bad. The book designer, makes a nice looking book because it was a theme that was carried through in all the other problems of the format. That this indentation helped to unify the book design, but it was difficult for the for rewriting to make it look good, because there are a lot of cases. You can imagine on 100 pages, 400 paragraphs. What are the chances that you'll get all possible distributions? And you have to rewrite for that. Okay. Now. These are things that I just ran across while I was studying while I was looking up what people had to say about printing. So that was not solved in a particular way. Now, what's this one? Displayed equations. So here is talking about printing of mathematics with and just some comments that people had made about displayed equations. Nothing funny there, so I won't go on. Now, what about macros? Now, here was the one. I had a chapter called Definitions, also known macros. Now, how would I find a suitable quote for that? Well, this one had me working for a while. I went up to, I found, first of all, I found Disraeli's quote, "I hate definitions," was fairly good. But then it turned out that I found that macro was the name of a corrupt Roman politician, and so in old history books it was possible to get a quote about this macro who didn't last very long, but he got into a few places there. Okay. Now let me see. How did I stumble across his name? I believe I was looking into all kinds. Well, first of all, the Oxford English Dictionary wouldn't have helped me here, but Oxford English Dictionary is a good source for the hard ones because they have quotations of they cite the word in its historical context, and often they choose interesting things to cite. But this particular one, I must have gotten it through some index or other that I just happened to notice. Let's see now. What do we got here? Alignment. Okay, this is talking about making tables, aligning things into columns, and so here I thought, okay, I'll do something a little different. I'll quote one of Dewdney's puzzles, which was about putting things into rows and columns. And then the answer page actually has a solution to this puzzle. So in the quotation, and then here, and I like Agatha Christie, so I was reading one of her novels, and I noticed that they talked about fifth columnists and so on. That seemed to be something I could appropriate here. Now, the title of her book NRM reminds me that I have another book here, which came out in this series of computer and typesetting, which is all about letter forms. Can you back off of this to get the page spread and all the symbols? In this book, every letter is given with with a computer program on the right-hand pages that drew the letters on the left-hand pages. And in order to lighten this up, I put quotations on the bottom every once in a while of where it would refer to things. I didn't have too many quotations in this particular section, obviously, but I know I do have some coming in here before long. Okay. Well, mostly when I get into the letters, I had things to say. Here's the page with a semicolon in it, and there was my wife had remembered that she had read something that memorable about semicolons, where there's a Somerset Maugham story about an author who had discovered the comic possibilities of the semicolon, and she had a humor of punctuation in her writing. And I wanted to show you this quote because Mary Claire, I understand, who's going to be our lecturer in a couple of weeks, is sometimes called Miss Comma, like there's Miss Manners, and so on. So she's supposed to know. I don't know about if she's an authority on semicolons, but she's supposed to be especially good about commas. And so so there aren't too many quotations about particular letters, but here was one that let me go back to this one first. I got one from James Thurber, has a story called The Wonderful O, and this is a children's story where he's trying to teach them the alphabet, but he abolishes all the O's in his story. And then in the page on E, I had room for a quote here, which is from a very interesting Bell Labs report by Gilbert called A Capacity Formula for a Binary Communication Link in which wrong output digits occur in bursts. Our work also has cryptographic and linguistic application. Now, if you look very closely, he gives the clue here to his whole quote here. He says, in particular, our writing contains only 25 symbols, A, B, C, D, F, G, and on to Z. Thus, the symbol of maximum probability in ordinary writing is missing from ours. He wrote this entire report without using the letter E, except in his own name, which he couldn't help. And you read through the report, and it actually proves a reasonable mathematical theorem, but he set this as an extra constraint that he just wouldn't use any words that had the letter E in them. Here's Bierce. Now Bierce wrote he was a famous San Franciscan who wrote the Devil's Dictionary and many other. He had regular columns in was it the Chronicle or the Examiner? I don't know. Anyway, I read through the Devil's Dictionary because it was likely to have something quotable. Besides, it's a lot of fun. And here he's talking about the letter M. He said two schools of Msters, whether the letter is henceforth has two sides of a triangle or three sides of a square, and he's talking about style of shaping of the letter M, and so this was appropriate for the page in which we have letter M in there. Here's something that Benjamin Franklin was interested in typography, and so he writes a letter to Bodoni, the inventor of a type style very similar to the one that I'm showing in this book here, but he doesn't like the letter T in Bodoni's title page, and so he writes him a letter saying this. Now, how did I find that particular reference? I believe I was invited to give a talk in the Franklin Institute, and I started to read about Benjamin Franklin's interest in printing because of that. Okay. One of the quotes at the beginning of this book is is about the whole style of type that I followed in the book, and that is, it's a type that talks about, this is a kind of letter that's capable of greater vulgarity and degradation than was ever the case with older fonts. So in other words, a lot of people don't care for this style of letters that I've got in these books throughout history. Now, the most fun, I think, comes when you can take things a bit out of context. And let's see, this one is called output routines, and I didn't know how to get what to say about outputs, but I got Leontief had published a lot about. He was a famous economist who had things about input-output, his input-output system, and so I thought if I read enough of his stuff, I could find that he used the word output in some way that would be also interpretable with respect to typography and algorithms and so on. And so here, technical has something to do with tech, I guess, and things like this. And there's something about changes in output. So I don't know. Now, summary was a hard one. I had 3 chapters called summary. Summary of vertical mode, then summary of horizontal mode, and summary of math mode. And how was I going to get 6 different quotations about summary? And then 6 more for the Metafont book. But I didn't realize I had the Metafont book to do when I started with this one. So first of all, this is summary of vertical mode, and I found one reasonably relevant thing, probably in the Oxford English Dictionary. But then this one was amazing to me, that I was able to find something was talking about verticality of composition and modes, because it had vertical and mode in the same sentence. Now, you could do that if you had all these texts online in the computer. You could say, which sentences have both vertical and mode in there. But this was it was talking about architecture, and that was, I believe, I found it under mode probably. In the thing there. Okay, now let's see. Summary of horizontal mode. There was a quote that said, "You may reduce all verticals into horizontals," and incidentally, in this chapter I had referred back to the vertical mode chapter to. Everything. A lot of the things in vertical also applied to horizontal. And Moxon happened to be also a man who wrote a famous book on printing. So this turned out to be an amazing find. I must have found that just by looking up for quotes in Oxford English Dictionary about vertical and horizontal. But then I was running short, and so I needed something about horizontal mode. So I got to quote Tech itself. And in a pinch, you can always quote yourself, and Professor Spitz in the history department said that Kai Lai Chung from math had come to him and was writing a book and wanted some, and asked Spitz for some ideas, and Spitz then had 3 or 4, but he couldn't think of the other one. He said, so Kai Lai said, you just say, okay, then you say something, just give me anything and I can quote you. So this was it. This was a reasonable quote for also for the meaning of the of the chapter. And in summary of math mode, what could I do there? Oh, here I was able to take one from the Style Manual of Chicago Press, just saying that math is tough and expensive. But here was one that turned out that I had discovered by being interested in Wales, that there was a folk tale about someone named Math in the Mabinogion. This goes on a little before time of King Arthur, I think. and the translator, he's a professor at UCLA who has some neat correspondence with, trying to learn more about math and so on. He's the one who told me how to hyphenate some Welsh words that I used in an example. So anyway, this has both math and summary in the sentence, and so I could get could find the two here. Let's see, recover. Now but talking about summary, I should go to the next one. This is for errors. The last chapter is about recovery from errors, and there's a lot of neat things to say about errors. But now let's go to the Metafont book. I had the same three. I had to do summary chapters there. Not quite as many. So summary of expressions was there, and I'm running out of things to say about summaries, and so I had to use expressions here. So I got to talk about expressionists, I guess, by looking into one of the novels that was Galsworthy. His novels were serialized on public television. I can't. What's the name of the series? I can't think of it anyway. But then Thomas More had written about things that were well remembered and summarily rehearsed, and so I could use that one. And then there's things about the language as a whole and detail, and so I tried to get some quotations about details. In fact, I worked very hard about trying, because a lot of a user manual is inevitably filled with details, and there's and so I had heard that let's see, the architect of our house told us that Mies van der Rohe had always said to his students that God is in the details, and that this is for him. I mean, he was one like me who liked minutiae and focusing on getting details straight. You see, what? God was, yes, and also Mies, yes, and and so I wanted to find where Mies had said this, so that I could quote Mies as saying God is in the details. In fact, I had used it in a lecture once, and somebody came up to me and afterwards said that was a wonderful quotation from Mies, almost. And so then I started looking through all of Mies's publications, and I couldn't find a single thing, and then I finally, so I wrote to two of the people who had recently written biographies of Mies, and I also met an architect in Boston, and he said yes, he had heard this. He was interested in helping me find this quote also, and so I got back finally a reference to a man who said this is something that Mies liked to say, and he had published this in architectural form. But I couldn't get a direct reference. I'd read a lot of Mies's speeches where he had a chance to say it and never said it. And then there was this other biography. And one of the biographers wrote back to me and said, yeah, this was a lot of people have said that Mies that this was one of Mies's favorite maxims, but they didn't know. He could assure me that Mies had said it, but he didn't know where. And then I got another reference to somebody who says, no, Mies never did say this, but people have but actually it comes from a French essayist who wrote millions of things, saying "Le bon Dieu est sous le détail" or something. I have a terrible French accent or something like this, but giving no reference whatsoever. So I started looking through French books of quotations and under this, and I found 4 or 5 really neat things about details, but never yet have I discovered the source of this phrase "God is in the details," and I'm still hoping for it. Well, here was the opposite approach with Thoreau, saying your life is frittered away by detail, and you should forget about details. Let's see, recovery from errors. This is one of my favorite. This is one of my favorite poems here, perhaps my favorite of all. You can read it for yourself by Pete Hine. I'm having this carved in. I'm having this carved in stone and by some stone cutters in England to keep in my garden. I just like this. I think it's a fairly good summary of one of my mottos in life: is to not be afraid to make mistakes, but try to learn from them, and so on. Now the other quote here is by Father Font, and since this is a book about fonts, I knew that then I learned that there was a Spanish explorer who was one of the first people to come to California in the Portola expedition, and he was the one who kept the diary of the trip, so his name was Font, and so great, he must say something in there that I can quote just because his name is Font. That would be relevant. And now, in fact, the directions of the route is also the kind of thing that you do when you're drawing letters, and so this turned out. But I had to read his whole diary in order to find that one. I mean, it was fascinating, though. I mean, I didn't mind a minute of it. I mean, he really told about the politics of the situation, and he put his whole. I mean, I don't think he knew this diary was going to be for publication particularly, and but he was writing it for the other fellows, his Jesuit colleagues in Mexico, and so I talked to the man who took Father Font's role in the bicentennial reenactment of the Portola expedition. They went from Mexico and came back up through here, and there was one man who was playing the part of Font in this thing, and he was a friend of one of our grad students here, so I talked to him about it, and so that was a nice. I think I probably got to use something else of him when they discovered El Palo Alto. I think I have a quote from him about that. Let's see. Font. Fray Pedro Font, 139. This is another one. Here we go. We arrived at the Arroyo de San Francisco, beside which stream is the redwood tree I spoke of yesterday. This is the tree that Palo Alto is named after. I measured its height with the graphometer. So you use the things about numbers and roots and dots and numbers and sites, which are very, very much like the diagram on the same page. And so this is a quote apropos. Okay. Now let's see. So sometimes the relevance of the quotation is not in the words, but in the thing below it. Let's see. Let me show you that. What is? Let's see. Making boxes. Do I have? Let's see. Boxes. That was one I. What can you say about boxes? That's interesting. So Shaw had another thing in that same article about rules. He said the only thing that never looks right is a rule. There is not in existence a page with a rule on it that cannot be instantly and obviously improved by taking the rule out. But there's another thing about boxing that I found in the OED, and for this this is one that I got from the British Library because I looked up the original. I decided to use the original spelling of all because a lot of the quotations come from very old times. So I decided to use the spelling in the original. I looked up every single quote, in the original to see if there was more than Bartlett said, if there was something interesting before or after. Boxing is something that doctors do or used to do and to prohibit bloodletting. I don't know this. So I thought it was a nice bloody quotation to use there. But they see boxes. There's something about boxes here where. Oh, okay. Here is one. Stevenson and Osborne. Very little does the amateur dwelling at home at ease comprehend the labors and perils of the author. And so it's talking about the author's peril, but the real connection with boxes is in the title of their book, not the thing that they said. And that was an interesting novel that I read just to see if it has anything interesting to say about boxes in the novel, and it was right here in chapter 1 where it had the best one. And a neat movie was made from that story. I have several boxes in my memory. That is just so there was in the Art of Computer Programming, there was a quotation from Hamlet: "In the temple of my memory, I'll wipe away all trivial fond. From the temple of my memory, I'll wipe away all trivial fond records," or something like this. It was just appropriate for a garbage collection. Talking about memory and records. So to me, part of the game is trying to find something that was interesting that was a little bit out of context. Now let's see. There was one thing people in this class will know. There was what I tried basically in this book here to set a standard of excellence for quotations, because I enjoy libraries so much. And so I came back and I had most of the problems solved, but some of the harder ones to go with. And I had one chapter where I just was completely stuck. And let's see if I can find it in the index, because it's something that only a few people will understand why these quotations are interesting, but I had to fill the page with something, and I did satisfy my own. Let's see now. Look under Grimm, I guess. Page 73. This is a chapter called Algebraic Expressions, and I didn't know. And the idea is that we're describing pictures in terms of algebraic expressions. And here are two quotes. Now, can anybody tell what makes these interesting to me, at least?
Your fascination with puns.
My fascination with puns, yeah. No, the actual thing was, though, how would I find this particular thing about the express? No words can express it, or expression. How would I actually try? I mean, I tell you right now, this is not in the OED. This cannot be found in any books of quotations. Nobody has ever thought these sentences were in any way remarkable. I use the online. We have Wuthering Heights and we have Grimm's Fairy Tales online. And so we can do a computer search for them and find every use of the word expression or express in those. And that was the way I got, so I decided to put those two on the same page, because that was the reason. And they aren't bad quotations, but I mean that was the only way to get it. Now, see, some of the appendices were the hardest here, and see if I can remember. There's something called generic font files. Now, generic font files is a description of a file format, and I was able to, I think, find a reference here to files. The other kind, and then to get something about Linnaeus, who set up the whole thing, is about genera and orders and so on in botany, and so found something that had to do with files and printing, because here he referred to generic characters, which sounds like it has to do with printing, and files have to do with whatever it is. Now let's see. Here's another one about details, Oscar Wilde. Details are always vulgar. I'm talking in this chapter about point system of typography, and so having the source of when somebody actually invents a concept is reasonable. There's an appendix about examples in both of them, and for this here, by the way, going back to the original spelling was difficult in this one because it used the old Thorn character for a th, and I had to make a new symbol in the alphabet in order to typeset it. But an example in doing is more commendable than teaching or preaching, and that's a reasonably good thing to say about examples. I had the same appendix in the textbook, and I had to have something to write about examples. And so I gave an example, a quote here from Mary Claire Van Lunen, saying the epigraph is among the most delightful of scholarly habits. Donald Knuth's work on fundamental algebra would be just as important if he hadn't begun with a quotation from Betty Crocker, but not so enjoyable. Part of the fun of an epigraph is turning a source to an unexpected use. And so I got to quote her where I was running out of that. Okay. One of the things in my chapter on examples was giving the macros that typeset this part of the format of the. I mean, the book is being used as an example of itself, and so it was reasonable to do that. Now, in the previous chapter is called Dirty Tricks, and so I took two quotations from detective stories about shortcuts and using methods that are displayed in the other part of the book. Now let's see, but I found in the when I did the Metaphon book, I found a very nice, looking up the word dirty and so on. And I guess just looking at Proverbs, I found that there was a very nice proverb from Jamaica. It says, every house has its dirty corner. And it's true about houses, but I also thought it was appropriate to have a corner of the manual about dirty tricks that could be used for that purpose. In the Appendix A in both books was about answers to exercises, and I need a lot of quotation about answers to exercises because the Art of Computer Programming each book has answers to exercises and so on. I was allowed to quote myself again here by quoting the preface to refer to the answers. And then there's a Shakespeare you can find by looking up in the complete concordances of Shakespeare to see what he had to say about answers. He says, "Call these foul offenders to their answers." I think that was kind of nice. Another place Shakespeare had said here, "How answer you for yourselves?" And I put that second because I used the same quote from the tech book this time, in the tech book, to indicate that a person does the answers this way. And let's see, the very last. Let's see. The index is another one that I needed a lot of quotations on because most of my books have indexes. And so in the Art of Computer Programming, I found a wonderful thing when I was reading an old Sears Roebuck catalog. They have reprinted some of the old catalogs, and I looked through it, browsing, and I noticed that it said in there, if you can't find it in the index, look very carefully throughout the entire catalog. And so I thought that was good. And that's in the Art of Computer. I've already used that, and so I have to. And so So what I found is, but I did find a man who wrote this in his book. He says, so essential that I consider an index to be to every book that I propose to bring a bill into Parliament to deprive an author who publishes a book without an index the privilege of copyright, moreover to subject him for a pecuniary penalty. Yet, from difficulties started by my printers, my own books have hitherto been without an index. That was in the Metafont book. In the text book, it's about typesetting, and so I got to use quotations from saying that important works should have an index, and so then it tells about an index. But this was one of my favorites from the biography of P.D.Q. Bach. He says, important references are given in bold-faced italicized numbers indicate fleeting references, whereas numbers in parentheses refer to mere implications or unwarranted extrapolations. Asterisks are used to identify particularly distasteful passages and so on. Well, I hope you can understand why I think this is fun and also perhaps worthwhile to broaden perspective. It's a hunt that is exciting, I think, to anybody who is not real narrow-minded. And to me, I just recommend trying to go and play libraries as musical instruments. You'll find it a lot of pleasure.